Danny Martinez pushed his cleaning cart down the long metal hallway of the UES Horizon. The wheels made a soft squeaking sound on the polished floor. It was 3 in the morning ship time, and most of the crew was sleeping. This was when Danny did his best work. The quiet hours when nobody bothered him, and he could clean in peace. He had been doing this job for 3 years now. 3 years of mopping floors and emptying trash bins and wiping down surfaces that got dirty again the next day. Most people on the ship did not even notice him. To them, he was just part of the background, like the walls or the lights overhead. Danny was 42 years old and not very tall. His hair was getting gray at the sides, and he had small lines around his eyes from squinting at his work. He wore the same blue jumpsuit every day, with his name patch sewn on the front. The patch was faded now from so many washes. The UES Horizon was the biggest and most important ship in the human fleet. It was part of something called the Galactic Defense Coalition. This meant humans worked together with alien races to keep peace in their part of space. The aliens were impressive beings with amazing abilities that made humans look simple by comparison. There were the Veltar, who stood 8 feet tall and had 4 arms each stronger than any human. Their skin was like armor, and they lived for battle. They respected strength above all things and saw humans as weak creatures who hid behind technology instead of fighting with honor. The Zephyrians were thin and graceful with large eyes that could see energy patterns invisible to other beings. Their brains worked faster than any computer, and they created technology that seemed like magic. They thought humans were primitive and slow to understand even basic concepts. The Etherians did not have solid bodies, but were made of pure energy that glowed with soft light. They could read minds and speak to each other without words across vast distances. To them, human thoughts were like the buzzing of insects, too simple to be worth listening to. Captain Lisa Rodriguez ran the ship with skill and determination. She was one of the few humans the aliens respected because she had proven herself in battle many times. She walked the halls with confidence and spoke to the alien officers as equals. Danny had cleaned her office many times, but she never looked at him directly. Commander Jake Sullivan was in charge of weapons and tactics. He was tall and strong for a human with short dark hair and serious eyes. The Veltar warriors liked him because he was not afraid to fight. He would step around Danny in the corridors without seeming to see him at all. Dr. Patricia Barnes was the chief medical officer who took care of both humans and aliens when they got hurt or sick. She was smart and worked hard to understand alien biology. Her medical bay was always busy, and Danny cleaned it carefully around all the strange equipment she used. None of these important people paid attention to Danny. He was just the cleaner, who showed up at night and made everything spotless by morning. They did not know that he listened to everything they said. They did not know that he watched how all the ship systems worked. They did not know that he had learned more about the UES Horizon than anyone else on board. Danny cleaned every part of the ship. He knew which ventilation shafts connected to which rooms. He knew where all the maintenance tunnels ran and how to get from one deck to another without using the main corridors. He knew which emergency systems were located where and how they worked. While he cleaned the bridge at night, he could hear the automatic systems talking to each other. He learned what the different sounds meant and how to tell when something was working right or wrong. When he cleaned the engine rooms, he watched the engineers fix problems and slowly understood how the ship stayed running. The aliens never talked to him, but they talked around him as if he was not there. He heard about their home worlds and their military strategies. He learned about their weaknesses, even though they would never admit they had any. He discovered that for all their advanced abilities, they did not understand human determination and creativity. Danny had his own small room near the maintenance decks. It was not much bigger than a closet, but it was clean and quiet. He kept his few belongings neat and organized. On his small desk was a tablet computer where he wrote down things he learned about the ship, not because anyone asked him to, but because he found it interesting. He wrote about how the gravity generators worked and where the backup power systems were located. He made maps of all the service tunnels and maintenance shafts. He noted which alien technologies were installed, where and how they connected to human systems. It was like putting together a puzzle that no one else cared about. Sometimes Danny wondered what would happen if the ship was ever in real trouble. The aliens were powerful, but they depended on their special abilities and advanced technology. Humans were weaker and simpler, but they were also more flexible. They could adapt and improvise when things went wrong. The thought did not worry him much. The U.E.'s Horizon was the most advanced ship in space with the best crew and the strongest weapons. Nothing could threaten them out here in the peaceful Kepler. Sector where they were on routine patrol. Danny finished cleaning the observation deck and looked out at the stars. Space was beautiful and quiet, with points of light scattered across the darkness like diamonds on black cloth. Somewhere out there were worlds full of beings he would never meet and wonders he would never see. He was just a cleaner on a starship, full of heroes and legends. But he was content with his small part in keeping everything running smoothly. After all, somebody had to do the simple jobs that nobody else wanted to think about. Tomorrow, there would be more floors to mop and more surfaces to wipe clean. The important people would continue their important work while Danny Martinez stayed invisible in the background. That was how things had always been and how they would always be. Or so he thought as he pushed his cart toward the next section that needed cleaning. Danny was cleaning the storage room next to the bridge when the alarm started. The sound was loud and sharp and made his ears ring. Red lights began flashing on the walls, and an automated voice spoke over the communication system. All hands to battle stations. This is not a drill. All hands to battle stations. Danny had heard this alarm during training exercises, but never for real. He pushed his cart into a corner and looked through the small window that connected the storage room to the bridge. What he saw made his heart beat faster. Captain Rodriguez was standing at her command chair, giving orders to her crew. The main screen showed dozens of enemy ships appearing out of nowhere around the horizon and other coalition vessels. They looked like giant insects made of metal and flesh, with weapons that glowed with evil light. "Dominion forces," shouted Commander Sullivan from his weapons station. "They are using some kind of cloaking technology. We never saw them coming." The Dominion Empire had been humanity's enemy for years. They wanted to control all the space lanes and destroy anyone who opposed them. Their ships were grown rather than built using biological technology that could heal damage and adapt to new threats. Danny watched the alien officers spring into action. The Veltar warriors moved to their combat positions with deadly grace. Their forearms worked the controls faster than human eyes could follow. They roared battle cries in their own language. It sounded like thunder. The Zephyrians took control of the ship's defensive systems. Their large eyes glowed brighter as they processed information at incredible speed. Energy shields appeared around the horizon as their advanced minds calculated the best way to protect the ship. The Etherians gathered in a circle near the center of the bridge. Their bodies became brighter as they joined their minds together. They reached out with their psychic powers to coordinate with other coalition ships and predict what the enemy would do next. For a while, it looked like the coalition forces might win. Their combined abilities were impressive to watch. The Veltar provided raw firepower that could destroy enemy ships with single shots. The Zephyrians created defensive barriers that seemed impossible to break through. The Etherians guided the fleet with perfect coordination, but the Dominion had prepared for this battle carefully. They had studied their enemies and learned about their strengths and weaknesses. Now they were ready to use that knowledge. Energy surge detected from enemy vessels, called out the Zephyrian science officer. Unknown weapon type approaching. The first wave of the new weapon hit the Etherian. Ships. It was not an explosion or a beam of energy, but something that attacked the mind itself. The Etherians began to scream without sound as their psychic abilities turned against them. Their glowing bodies flickered and went dark as they collapsed. To the deck. Neural disruptors, gasped Dr. Barnes as she ran to help the fallen Etherians. They are targeting advanced nervous systems. The weapons spread through the Coalition fleet like a disease. The Zephyrian ships lost power as their crews fell unconscious. Their brilliant minds could not cope with the neural interference and simply shut down to protect themselves. Even the mighty Valtar began to stumble and fall. Their enhanced nervous systems that made them such perfect warriors became a weakness when attacked by the disruptor technology. One by one, the four-armed giants collapsed at their stations. On the bridge of the horizon, the same thing was happening. The alien officers dropped where they stood as the neural weapon overwhelmed their advanced brains. Captain Rodriguez fought. The effects longer than most, but even her strong will could not resist forever. "Danny," she called out as her vision began to blur. "Danny, where are you?" Danny pressed against the storage room door, but could not make himself move. He watched helplessly as the captain fell to her knees and then onto her side. Her eyes closed, and she stopped moving. Commander Sullivan was the last human officer standing. He fired the ship's weapons at the approaching Dominion vessels, but his shots went wide as the neural disruptor affected his aim. He grabbed the edge of his console and tried to stay upright, but it was no use. He collapsed next to his station with a soft thud. The bridge became quiet except for the beeping of computer systems and the hum of life support. Red emergency lights cast strange shadows across the bodies of the fallen crew. Outside the viewports, Danny could see Dominion boarding pods attaching themselves to the ship's hull like metal ticks. Danny realized he was alone. The neural disruptors had knocked out every alien and most of the human crew throughout the ship. The weapon was designed to target advanced nervous systems, and the aliens had the most advanced brains in the galaxy. But Danny's brain was simple and basic. He was just a cleaner with no special abilities or enhanced intelligence. The weapon that had destroyed the minds of brilliant aliens had passed over him like he did not exist. He opened the storage room door and stepped onto the bridge. His footsteps echoed in the silence as he walked between the unconscious bodies. These were the people who commanded respect throughout the galaxy. Now they lay helpless on the deck while enemy forces prepared to board their ship. Danny knelt beside Captain Rodriguez and checked her pulse. She was breathing, but would not wake up no matter how he tried to rouse her. The same was true for all. The others. They were alive but completely unconscious. The main screen still showed the battle outside. Coalition ships drifted without power as Dominion forces moved between them like sharks among fish. Boarding pods launched from the enemy vessels toward every disabled ship in the fleet. Danny stood up and looked around the bridge. All the controls and displays were still working, but there was nobody to operate them. The ship's computer systems continued their automatic functions, but they could not fight. Back against the boarding parties that were about to cut through the hull, he walked to the captain's chair and sat down slowly. The seat was too big for him, and he felt small and out of place. From here, he could see the entire bridge and all the fallen heroes who had always ignored him. "Computer," he said in a voice that shook slightly. "Status report. Multiple boarding pods attached to outer hull." The computer replied in its calm electronic voice. "Hull breaches detected on decks 5, 7, and 9. Life support operating on emergency power. Weapon systems locked pending crew authorization." Danny nodded, though nobody was there to see him. The Dominion forces were cutting their way into the ship while he sat alone on the bridge. Soon they would reach the important areas and take control of everything. He thought about trying to wake up the captain or commander, but he had already tried that. He thought about hiding in his storage room until it was all over, but that would not help anyone. He thought about surrender, but knew the Dominion did not take prisoners. Instead, Danny Martinez, the invisible cleaner, sat in the captain's chair and began to think about everything he had learned in 3 years of working on this ship. He knew every corridor and every system. He knew how everything connected and how it all worked together, that maybe being simple and overlooked was not such a bad thing after all. Danny sat in the captain's chair for only a moment before he heard the sound of metal being cut. The Dominion soldiers were burning through the hull with their energy tools. Soon they would be inside the ship, and then it would be too late to do anything. He got up from the chair and walked to the main computer console. His hands moved over the controls he had watched the crew use hundreds of times. The screen lit up with information about the ship's status and the location of the boarding parties. 3 groups of Dominion soldiers had attached their pods to different parts of the ship. The first group was cutting into the cargo bay on deck 7. The second group was working on the shuttle bay on deck 5. The third group was trying to reach the engine room on deck 9. Danny pulled up the ship's internal camera system. He had installed and cleaned these cameras many times and knew how to access them. The screens showed him empty corridors and unconscious crew members lying where they had fallen. But they also showed him the Dominion soldiers as they broke through. The hull. The enemy troops were tall and thin with gray skin and large black eyes. They wore armor that looked like it was made from the same biological material as their ships. Their weapons were long and curved and glowed with the same evil light he had seen on their vessels. They moved in perfect formation, like they had practiced this many times. Each group had 6 soldiers, and they advanced through the ship with confidence. They expected no resistance from unconscious prey. Danny watched them for a few minutes and began to understand their pattern. They were following the main corridors toward important areas like the bridge and the engine room. They moved quickly, but carefully checking each room as they passed. That was their first mistake. They did not know about the maintenance tunnels and service shafts that ran through the entire ship. Danny knew about these passages because he used them every day to move his equipment and supplies. The Dominion soldiers would never think to look for them. Danny left the bridge through a small door marked maintenance access that most people never noticed. Inside was a narrow tunnel with pipes and cables running along the walls. He had to crouch to fit, but he could move through these passages faster than anyone using the main corridors. He crawled to a junction where several tunnels met and pulled up a floor panel. Below him was the ship's cleaning supply storage area. Danny dropped down and began gathering materials he would need. First, he took several bottles of industrial cleaning fluid. This stuff was strong enough to eat through metal if you were not careful with it. He also grabbed some floor wax that became very slippery when mixed with water. There were foam dispensers used for cleaning carpets that could fill a room with thick white clouds. Danny put everything in a maintenance cart and pushed it through the service tunnels toward deck 7, where the first boarding party had entered. He knew exactly where they would be by now, based on their movement pattern. The Dominion soldiers were advancing down corridor C7 toward the main elevator banks. Danny reached a maintenance panel above their heads and quietly opened it. He could hear their strange language as they communicated with each other. Danny poured the industrial cleaning fluid onto the floor ahead of the soldiers. The liquid spread out in a thin layer that was almost invisible on the metal deck. He added some water to activate the floor wax and create the most slippery surface possible. The lead soldier stepped onto the treated area and immediately lost his footing. His Arms windmilled as he tried to stay upright, but it was no use. He crashed to the deck with a loud clang that echoed through the corridor. The other soldiers rushed forward to help their fallen comrade, and also slipped on the invisible hazard. Soon all 6 Dominion troops were sliding around on the deck, unable to get good footing. Their weapons scattered across the slippery surface. While they struggled, Danny moved to the next maintenance panel. He activated one of the foam dispensers, and thick white clouds began pouring from the ceiling vents. Within seconds, the corridor was filled with dense foam that made it impossible to see or breathe properly. Dominion soldiers began making panicked sounds as they tried to navigate through the slippery foam-filled hallway. They had expected to face advanced alien technology or military resistance. Instead, they were being defeated by cleaning supplies. Danny crawled through the tunnels to Deck 5, where the second boarding party was advancing toward the shuttle bay. These soldiers were being more careful after hearing the commotion from Deck 7. They moved slower and checked every corner. This time, Danny tried a different approach. He accessed the environmental controls for their section of the ship. With a few keystrokes, he began adjusting the gravity in their area. First, he made it twice as heavy as normal. The soldiers stumbled under the increased weight and had trouble lifting their weapons. Then he reversed it and made the gravity very light. The Dominion troops found themselves floating toward the ceiling with every step. They bounced off the walls and each other as they tried to move forward. Their perfect formation became chaos as they struggled with the changing gravity. Danny also adjusted the lighting in their section. He made it very bright, then very dark, and bright again. The rapid changes confused the soldiers and hurt their large, sensitive eyes. They began firing their weapons at shadows and hitting nothing but empty walls. The third boarding party on Deck 9 was getting close to the engine room. Danny could not let them reach that area because they could disable the ship's power and life support from there. He needed to stop them quickly. Danny reached into his cart and pulled out several floor-cleaning robots. These small machines normally scrubbed deck plates automatically, but Danny had learned how to reprogram them over the years. He set them to maximum speed and sent them rolling down the corridor toward the advancing soldiers. The robots were low and fast and made loud buzzing sounds as their cleaning brushes spun at high speed. To the Dominion soldiers, they must have looked like attack drones. The troops began firing at the small machines, but their weapons were designed for fighting large targets, not tiny robots, while the soldiers were distracted by the cleaning robots. Danny accessed the ship's fire suppression system. Foam and water began spraying from nozzles in the ceiling. The corridor became a mess of slippery surfaces and thick white clouds. Danny smiled as he watched through the security cameras. The mighty Dominion Empire was being held off by a janitor with a cart full of cleaning supplies. Their advanced biological technology meant nothing against human creativity and determination. But he knew this was just the beginning. More boarding parties would come, and they would learn from the mistakes of the first groups. Danny needed to think bigger and use everything he knew about the ship to mount a real defense. He crawled back through the maintenance tunnels toward the main computer core. If he could reach that area, he might be able to take control of more ship systems. The UE's horizon was full of technology that could be used as weapons if he knew how to think creatively. Danny Martinez was no longer just a cleaner hiding from the enemy. He was becoming something the Dominion had never faced before, a human being with nothing left to lose and everything he needed to fight back. Danny crawled through the maintenance shafts toward the central computer core while more Dominion boarding pods attached to the ship's hull. His simple tricks had slowed down the first wave of soldiers, but he could hear new groups cutting through the metal walls. They would be more careful now and harder to stop. The computer core was located in the heart of the ship, protected by thick armor and multiple security systems. Danny had cleaned this area many times and knew all the access codes. The cleaning staff needed these codes to maintain the computer equipment without damaging the sensitive electronics. He dropped down from a ceiling panel into the core chamber. The room was filled with tall black towers that hummed with electronic activity. Lights blinked in patterns that showed the computer's thinking processes. This was the brain of the UES Horizon, and Danny was about to give it new instructions. Danny sat at the main control station and began typing commands. His fingers moved slowly at first, but gained speed as he remembered everything he had learned. By watching the crew work, the ship's systems responded to his touch like they recognized an old friend. First, he accessed the internal sensors that monitored every part of the ship. The screens showed him exactly where the new boarding parties were located and which direction they were heading. There were now 6 groups of Dominion soldiers inside the horizon, and more were coming. Danny began to think like the enemy commanders. They would want to capture the bridge to control the ship. They would want to take the engine room to disable the power. They would want to reach the weapon systems to turn the ship's guns against other coalition vessels. But Danny had advantages they could not imagine. He knew every shortcut and hidden passage. He understood how all the ship's systems connected together. Most importantly, he could think like a human. While they expected to fight aliens with predictable abilities, he started with the food dispensers located throughout the ship. These machines normally provided meals for the crew, but Danny reprogrammed them to spray hot liquid at head height whenever doors opened nearby. The Dominion soldiers walking through doorways were hit in the face with streams of burning soup and coffee. Next, he modified the automated cargo handling systems. These machines moved supplies around the ship using magnetic lifts and conveyor belts. Danny programmed them to grab anything that moved through their sensors. When Dominion soldiers walked past, they found themselves picked up by invisible forces and carried in the wrong direction. The ship's waste processing system became another weapon. Danny reversed the flow in the pipes so that instead of carrying waste away, it pumped smelly liquid back into areas where the enemy soldiers were advancing. The Dominion troops found themselves wading through ankle-deep muck that slowed their movement and ruined their equipment. Danny accessed the communication system and began playing loud sounds through the speakers in areas occupied boarding parties. He used recordings of Veltar battle roars and Zephyrian energy weapons firing. The sounds echoed through the metal corridors and made it impossible for the soldiers to coordinate their movements. But his most effective weapon was the ship's transportation system. The UES Horizon had moving walkways and lift platforms that carried people and equipment between decks. Danny took control of these systems and began moving them in unexpected ways. Dominion soldiers stepping onto walkways found themselves carried backward toward areas they had already cleared. Lift platforms would suddenly drop or rise, carrying enemy troops to the wrong decks. Some soldiers were trapped between floors when Danny stopped the lifts halfway through their movement. The boarding parties began to spread out and split into smaller groups, trying to avoid Danny's traps. This was exactly what he wanted. Smaller groups were easier to handle, and he could deal with them one at a time. Danny pulled up the ship's fabrication systems on his control screen. These machines normally created spare parts and tools for the crew, but they could make almost anything if programmed correctly. Danny began producing simple weapons and devices using materials from the ship's recycling systems. He made small, explosive charges using chemicals from the cleaning supplies. He created smoke bombs that filled corridors with thick gray clouds. He fabricated caltrops, made from scrap metal that punctured the boots of advancing soldiers. The fabrication systems also produced tools Danny could use to modify existing ship equipment. He made cutting tools to open new passages between decks. He created electronic devices that could hack into Dominion equipment and disable their weapons. Meanwhile, Danny was learning more about his enemies by watching them through the security cameras. The Dominion soldiers were efficient and disciplined, but they followed predictable patterns. They always moved in the same formations and used the same tactics. More importantly, they depended too much on their advanced technology. When that technology failed or behaved unexpectedly, they became confused and made mistakes. They were not used to adapting to new situations. Like humans were not, Danny began using this weakness against them. He would make ship systems work normally, until the soldiers got used to them and suddenly change how they behaved. Lights that had been steady would start flashing. Doors that opened easily would suddenly require force. Elevators that worked perfectly would stop between floors. The psychological effect was devastating. The Dominion soldiers began to distrust everything around them. They moved more slowly and checked every surface before stepping on it. They wasted time and energy being cautious about things that might or might not be traps. Danny also started using the ship's medical systems as weapons. He released harmless but bad-smelling gases through the air vents that made the soldiers think they were being poisoned. He activated decontamination showers that soaked enemy troops with cold water and soap. The ship's gravity generators became tools for harassment. Danny would make small areas of the ship have different gravity than the surrounding areas. Soldiers would step from normal gravity into a zone where they suddenly weighed 3 times as much, or hardly anything at all. But Danny's greatest advantage was still his knowledge of the ship's hidden spaces. While the Dominion forces struggled through the main corridors, he moved freely through maintenance tunnels and service shafts. He could appear anywhere on the ship without warning. He used this mobility to place traps and obstacles exactly where they would do the most damage. He could observe enemy movements and predict where they would go next. Most importantly, he could strike at the soldiers from directions they never expected. The boarding parties began to slow their advance as they encountered more and more resistance. What should have been a quick capture of a helpless ship was turning into a nightmare of delays and casualties. The Dominion commanders outside the ship started sending angry messages, demanding faster progress. Danny intercepted these communications and learned that the enemy was getting frustrated and impatient. They had expected easy victory over unconscious prey, but instead were facing an opponent who seemed to be everywhere at once. That gave Danny an idea for his next move. If the Dominion thought they were fighting multiple enemies, maybe he could make them believe the entire crew was awake and fighting back. He began programming the ship's systems to create false signs of organized resistance. Lights would turn on and off in patterns that suggested crew members moving through different sections. Computer terminals would activate and show fake activity, as if people were using them. Weapon systems would power up briefly, then shut down as if someone was trying to bring them online. The deception worked better than Danny had hoped. The Dominion soldiers began reporting that human resistance was stronger than expected. They requested reinforcements and heavier weapons to deal with the organized defense they thought they were facing. Danny smiled as he watched the enemy's confusion grow. They were fighting shadows and phantoms created by a simple human with access to the ship's computers. Every minute they wasted gave him more time to prepare new surprises, but he knew the real test was still coming. Eventually, the Dominion forces would reach the computer core where he was hiding. When that happened, Danny would have to face them directly with nothing but his wits and whatever weapons he could improvise. The cleaner who had been invisible for 3 years was about to become the most important person on the ship. Danny was working at the computer core when he noticed something strange happening on the medical scanners. The neural disruptor weapon that had knocked out the crew was still active, but the readings were changing. Human brain patterns were starting to show unusual activity. At first, Danny thought the scanners were broken, but as he watched the displays more carefully, he realized that human minds were adapting to the neural interference. Their brains were creating new pathways to work around. A disruption. The weapon designed to shut down advanced alien intelligence was having a different effect on simpler human minds. Captain Rodriguez was the first to show signs of recovery. Her brain waves became stronger and more organized as her military training helped her fight through the neural static. Danny watched through a security camera as she slowly opened her eyes and looked around the bridge. The captain tried to sit up, but fell back down as dizziness hit her. She pressed a hand to her forehead and spoke in a weak voice. "Computer status report," she managed to say. "Multiple boarding parties detected throughout the ship," the computer replied. "Defensive actions in progress under emergency protocols." Rodriguez looked confused because she had not authorized any defensive actions. She tried to access the ship's systems from her position on the floor, but found that someone else was already in control. Danny activated the communication system and spoke directly to the captain. His voice echoed through the bridge speakers. "Captain, this is Danny Martinez in the computer core. I have been coordinating the ship's defense while the crew was unconscious." "Danny," the captain said with surprise. "The cleaner Danny." "Yes, ma'am." The neural disruptors did not affect humans the same way they affected the aliens. "I have been using ship systems to slow down the boarding parties, but I need help." Captain Rodriguez struggled to her feet using the command chair for support. Her head was still spinning, but her military instincts were taking over. She began checking the status of her crew and found that other humans were starting to wake up as well. Commander Sullivan opened his eyes at his weapons station. His hands moved automatically to the controls he knew so well. The neural interference was still affecting his fine motor skills, but he could think clearly again. "Captain," he said in a voice that was stronger than he felt, "weapon systems are offline. Someone has been running the ship's defense using improvised methods." Dr. Barnes was stirring at her medical station. She pulled herself upright and began scanning the unconscious alien crew members. Their advanced nervous systems were still completely shut down by the disruptor weapon. They would not be waking up anytime soon. Danny continued coordinating this ship's defenses from the computer core, while more human crew members regained consciousness. Petty Officer Alex Johnson, at the communications station, managed to establish contact with other coalition ships. He discovered that humans throughout the fleet were beginning to recover while their alien allies remained unconscious. The neural disruptors had backfired in an unexpected way. Instead of permanently damaging human brains, they had forced them to evolve new neural pathways. Humans were becoming more adaptable and creative as their minds worked harder to compensate for the interference. Chief Engineer Carol Thompson made her way to the engine room and found that someone had been using the ship's systems in ways she had never imagined. Life support was running on backup power, but functioning perfectly. The engines were operating at reduced capacity, but still providing movement and artificial gravity. "Who has been running my engines?" she called out over the communication system. "Danny." "Martinez, ma'am," came the reply from the computer core. "I have been trying to keep everything working while you were unconscious." Carol accessed her control panels and was amazed at what she found. The ship's systems had been reprogrammed to work together in completely new ways. Cleaning equipment was being used as weapons. Food dispensers were acting as defensive turrets. Even the waste processing system had become part of the ship's defenses. "Captain." Rodriguez made her way to the computer core with Commander Sullivan close behind her. They found Danny sitting at the main control station, surrounded by screens, showing the locations of enemy boarding parties throughout the ship. His cleaning cart was nearby, filled with improvised weapons and tools. "Report," the captain ordered as she took in the scene. Danny stood up and faced his commanding officer. For the first time in 3 years, she was looking directly at him with Full attention. 6 Dominion boarding parties are inside the ship, ma'am. I have been using environmental controls and automated systems to slow their advance. The aliens are still unconscious from the neural disruptors, but more humans are waking. Up every few minutes, Captain Rodriguez looked at the tactical displays and saw the results of Danny's unconventional warfare. The boarding parties that should have captured the ship in minutes were still struggling through corridors filled with obstacles and traps. "How do you know how to do all this?" she asked. "I clean this ship every night, ma'am. I know every system and every passage. I have been watching and learning for 3 years, while nobody paid attention to me." Commander Sullivan was studying the weapons status board. "Danny, you have been fighting off 6 boarding parties by yourself using cleaning. Supplies and food dispensers." "Yes, sir. I figured they would not expect resistance from a janitor, so I used that advantage." Captain Rodriguez felt a mixture of shame and admiration. She had ignored this man for years, while he quietly learned everything about her ship. Now he had saved them all using nothing but creativity and determination. "What do you need from us?" she asked. "Help, ma'am. The Dominion forces are adapting to my tactics, and more boarding parties are coming. If we work together, we can take back the ship." The captain nodded and began issuing orders. The recovering human crew members took control of their stations, while Danny shared his knowledge of the ship's hidden capabilities. Together, they began a coordinated counterattack against the boarding parties. Danny's improvised weapons and traps became part of a larger strategy. Commander Sullivan used the ship's real weapon systems in combination with Danny's creative modifications. Chief Engineer Thompson optimized the power systems to support both conventional operations and Danny's unusual defensive measures. The tide of battle began to turn as human adaptability overcame Dominion technology. The boarding parties found themselves facing opponents who did not fight by any rules they understood. Every corridor became a maze of unexpected hazards and creative traps. More importantly, the humans were learning to work together in new ways. The neural disruptor effects had enhanced their ability to think creatively and adapt to changing situations. They were becoming more